A weak architect picks an answer. A strong architect explains the decision. They explain what they choose. They explain what they rejected. They explain what risk still remains. In previous video, we focused on answer ranking. We learned that certification questions are not only asking what is technically possible. They are asking which decision choice best fits the constraints. Now we turn that same thinking into a practical architect workflow. Because in a real system, the answer is not enough. Claude systems drift, tools change, platform behavior changes. Teams forget why a choice was made. And when nobody remembers the reasoning, the same mistake comes back later. So the artifact matters. The artifact is how you present the reasoning. In this course, we use 3 decision artifacts. First, the architecture decision record. Second, the tradeoff memo. Third one, the risk node. Each one has a different job. Use an architecture decision record when the decision affects architecture or system behavior. Use a tradeoff memo when you are comparing options under constraints. Use a risk node when the choice is acceptable for now, but needs a patch pass, a review trigger, or a monitoring plan. The split is important. Do not force every thought into a full architecture decision record. That is how documentation becomes deadweight. A short risk node is enough for a known weakness. A trade-off memo is enough when the main value is explaining why you rejected bigger, more complex, or more volatile option. The goal is not paperwork. The goal is reusable reasoning. Let us start with the architecture decision record. An architecture decision record has 5 useful parts. First, context. What problem, constraint, or failure force a choice? Second, decision. What are we doing? Third, options considered. What else could we have done? Fourth, trade-offs. What gets better? What gets worse? What failure modes remains? Fifth, consequences. What should be monitored, patched, or revisited later? If you cannot write a decision in one sentence, you probably have not found your real decision yet. You may be mixing architecture with implementation details. For example, this is not a clear architecture decision. We will improve the tool working and make the agent more reliable. That is too vague. A stronger decision sounds like this. We will use schema constraint 2 inputs for operations that require reliable validation. That sentence is clear. It names the architecture move. It tells us where the boundary is, and it can be tested later. Now, the second artifact, the trade-off memo. A trade-off memo is lighter than architecture decision record. Use it when the main question is why this option and why not the alternatives. In this course, we use trade-off memos to justify lean first version choice. What do we ship now? What do we defer? How do we avoid creating maintenance debt? This is how you avoid overbuild. If a scenario can be solved with strict tool inputs, you do not jump directly to a larger orchestration layer. If a workflow only needs validation feedback, do not add a multi-agent system because it sounds more advanced. A trade-off memo protects you from fake sophistication. Now, the third artifact, the risk node. Risk node capture what might break later. It should have 5 things. First, the failure layer. Where can the system fail? Second, the impact. What happens if it fails? The mitigation. What are we doing to reduce the risk now? Fourth, the patch path. How would we fix it later? And fifth, the review trigger. What event tells us if it's time to revisit the choices? It is especially important for Claude Code, Model Context Protocol, and platform-specific details. The video teaches the stable decisions. The risk node tracks the part that may need updating. For certification preparation, this is the same muscle as rejecting distractors. A risky option may sound powerful, it may sound modern, it may sound impressive. But if the risk is unnecessary or the patch path is unclear, it is usually not the best answer. Production architecture is not about sounding advanced. It is about controlling failure. Now, let us fill a short architecture decision record Using scenario, strict tool use versus relying on prompt wording. The architecture decision record kit is in the course download pack. The README file gives you the rule for choosing the right artifact. In this example, the decision affects behavior and reliability, so it belongs in architecture decision record. There is the context. An agent is allowed to call tools, but some tools calls require deterministic boundaries. For example, a tool may update a record, retrieve private information, trigger a workflow, or return structured data that another system depends on. In those cases, vague instructions is not enough. Now, the decision. We will use strict tool input and schema constraint control where the workflow requires reliability. That is the decision. Now the rejected alternatives. The rejected alternatives prompt only enforcements. That means telling the model to behave correctly, but not putting the rule at the interface boundary. For example, only call this tool when the user has provided all required fields. That instructions may help. But by itself, it is weaker than a strict input schema and validation feedback. Now the trade-off. Strict tool use costs a little more upfront decision work. You must define the fields, you must define what is required, you must define what happens when validation fails. But it reduces ambiguity. It improves validation, it makes failures easier to debug, and it gives the system clear boundary. Prompt-only enforcement is cheaper to write, but it is weaker when the operation has business risk. So the ranking is clear. For low-risk behavior, prompt guidance may be enough. For high reliable tool use, strict tool inputs are stronger. The boundary should match the risk. Now the risk node says what matters. Maybe the schema still needs better error messages. Maybe the team needs to watch for tool overlap. Maybe a platform feature changes. Maybe feature users need a clear recovery path when validation fails. The point is to capture the review trigger now, instead of rediscovering the risk after some breaks. A good risk node may say, review the decision when tool errors increase, when new overlapping tools are added, or when the platform changes validation behaviors. That is useful, that is specific, that is reusable. Now connect this back to the exam. A good exam answer is basically a mini architecture decision record. It identifies the failure, it chooses the right lever, it rejects the plausible alternative, and it acknowledges the risk. So when you review answer, do not only ask, did I get the letter right? Ask, can I explain why this answer is the best answer? Can I name the failure layer? Can I name the architecture lever? Can I explain why the destructor is weaker? Can I explain what risk still remains? That is the difference between guessing and architectural judgment. Your next action is simple. Open the architecture decision record kit in the course download pack. Read the example architecture decision record. Then use the template after the first lab. Keep it short. One clear decision, one rejected alternative, one trade-off, one risk node. That is enough. In the next lesson, we will apply this workflow to real course decision, so you can practice explaining architecture choices the same way the certification expects you to rank them.